Hey everyone, how's it going? My name is Dale. Welcome back to this channel. You can consider these lessons as an update for the Python for Finance lesson number 1 and lesson number 2, and also for an update for the automated real-time graph scraping plotting Python project. We built this project 1 year ago, and Yahoo recently has changed the backend and also the HTML code. Therefore, we need to change accordingly in order for us to continue to retrieve the data lively. And once you've done that and followed exactly what we are doing here, you can follow the original code and to optimize the process and plotting without any big changes. So let's go ahead and get started. We will continue to use the original skeletons, the flow, for building the real-time graph scraping. So what we need to do is to retrieve the data, retrieve the URL from this real-time price functions. And once we have that URL, we have that web content, we can use this web content div to help us to retrieve the relevant informations and return it back to this real-time price. Once we have that relevant information, we will then just turn it back into this while loop and then use the pandas.csv to save the file. So the flow and skeletons are exactly the same. First thing first, we import the pandas as PDs that will help us to download, that will help us to save the data. And then we use a datetime library that will help us to get the datetime objects for us to store the data to make sure that we know when we capture the data. And then we'll use the request to help us to retrieve the HTML code from the target URL. And once we have the URL, once we have the HTML codes, we will then use BeautifulSoup to help us to retrieve the relevant and useful informations. And finally, we'll use an OS library that will help us to identify the path for us to save the data. In this code, we also introduce the error. This is the connection error, just in case there's some things that disallow us to connect to the URL, to the target's URL. It will raise us a connections error. On the other hand, just in case if we cannot retrieve any information, we will also raise another error. So we will set the error code as 0 at the very beginning. And just in case if there's anything wrong, we will then change this error code to 1 that will help us to understand that there are some errors happened. The first things that we need to have is, of course, the URL, the target website. This is the web page that we would like to do the web scraping. So we copy the URL, and then just like what we did before, we want to provide some flexibility, and we sort the target stock into a list, and then we'll pass this list into this real-time stock, which will provide the stock code. And then this stock code will, of course, replace some content, some text in this URL, so that when we loop through this stock list, it will help me to retrieve the appropriate stock. And then we will try to use this URL to make a request. and we will use the request library and use the get function to get the contents in this URL and store all the contents into this R variable. But sometimes that might be an error. So there might be an connections error to be specific. So in that case, we will just return an empty list of them and then set the error code into 1 and get 5 lists over here. So we will just return 5 empty lists. And of course, you can also print there's a connections error so that you understand that there's something wrong with the connections. When we make this request, or when we have successfully make this request, we will get some information in this R. However, this R is a little bit messy. The information, so the contents is not well organized. In that case, we will use BeautifulSoup, these functions, to help us to organize it in a better way, and so that we can search the contents that are relevant to us. To identify the appropriate information in this web content, we will need to identify the div which store our informations. So in that case, we will need to identify the div and also inside this div which values that we would like to have. So there are 3 parameters that we need to set. First of all, we need to pass it on for the entire contents to this web content div. And then once we have this everything inside this web content div, we would like to retrieve the specific div. And then once we have that specific div, we want to retrieve the specific value. And of course, we will return that specific values into a text over here. And the first things that I would like to retrieve is the price and also the price changes. So before we pass it on with the correct class path, let's build the functions first. To retrieve the web content in that particular path, we will use the find all methods in the BeautifulSoup and then pass it on into the web content div. Just like I mentioned, because all the informations are stored in div, we would like to find all the div. But of course, we want to make it specified, to specify into a specific div that contains the values that we would like to retrieve. So in this class, although we understand this is a div class, we still would like to specify the class path. So instead of retrieve all the div, we just would like to retrieve a specific div. So we will just try, and just in case, if there are some error here, we call it index error. That means we retrieve nothing. In that case, we will just assign an empty list back to this test. Oh, we already have the return text. There are two cases that we need to handle. If we go back here, the first information that we would like to achieve is this Apple's stock price and also the price changes over here. This is the information that we would like to retrieve. And then these informations actually, let me make it bigger, are stored into, let me expand the div, here we go, are actually stored into a tab over here called Thin Streamer. Thin Streamer. On the other hand, this is the first cases. On the other hand, the second cases, we say we would like to retrieve this 1 year's target over here. Let me move it down a little bit. Here we go. Just bear with me a second. Yep, we got the table over here. But inside this table, you can see that this value, there's no tape for that. There's no tape for that. It just specifies it as a data tags or something like that. So in that case, there are two cases. The first is that we have a thin streamer, that is the tapes that we would like to retrieve the information from there. On the other hand, because everything right here is stored in a table, so what I'm going to do is just use a loop to loop all these informations over here. And then because the first target, first year target is the last value, so I would just retrieve the last value, and then in order for me to retrieve this estimate. So there are two different ways to retrieve the information. So I'm going to use if else to handle these two different conditions. But before, remember that Yahoo Finance stored these values into a span. So in this case, they change it to a thin streamer. So in that case, we need to change it from a span to thin streamer. However, for the table, again, they also change that. In that case, just in case there's no thin streamer that is a table, I will just assign a none to that. In that case, I'm not going to assign anything over here. But for this case, we are going to have the thin streamer. This is the thin streamer, and this is the thin streamer that is not equals to none. So in that case, we will use the find all methods to find all value inside this thin streamer over here. So just find all the contents inside this thin streamer. And then we will use a comprehensions list to list out all the contents in this spans. Or you can just change it to a thin streamers, but I just keep it as a spans over here. And then inside this spans, I want to retrieve the informations. So just return me a text over here. And then for the time being, I will just set this text equals to an empty list. Of course, I will change it later on. One more thing that we need to specify right here is the class path. That is the div that store this thin streamer. So let me find out the path over here. Here we go. This is the path over here. So you can simply copy the elements over here that store these thin streamers value, that stores the price value and also the changes. Just put it back over here. And this is the div that we are looking for. This is the div path. And inside this div path, we will get the thin streamers to retrieve these price and also the price changes value. Now let me print out the test to let you know what we got. Say here we want to look through this stock. This is the stock. And here we have the stock code inside this stock. For stock in stock, and then just print me out the no, I will just do the printing over here. Just print me out this text, and to avoid the error, just make sure there's a empty list that allow us to return. So now let's take a look to see whether we can return the text. Excellent. So in this thin streamer, there are three things stored in this thin streamer. And that includes the price, the changes, and the percentage changes, and two empty values. But that is not what we concern. Right here, I just want to make sure that this format is what we want to have. So I just want to make sure that this format will be exactly the same as what we show in the Python for Finance lesson number 1 and lesson number 2, just to make sure that it follows the exact format, so that once you go through these videos, you can just continue to go through the Python for Finance lesson number 3 and 4 and so on. So there are two things that we have for that particular format. That is the price and also the changes. And in that case, of course, the price is the text 0. That is the first element. And then the second element, that is this one, and plus this one. They are combined together in previous cases. But right now, they are separate into two different theme streamer. So in that case, I will just use an add functions and operations to combine them back together. And of course, if we cannot retrieve anything, there is an error. And then for the price and changes, just set it to an empty list. And now let me show you what we have for this price and also for the changes. Let me remove the text. Excellent. We just successfully retrieved the price and also the price changes. The next things that I want to do is to retrieve the volume.